Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Kanyana, and I am your host for this audio series called Blackness. If this is your first time joining us today, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your wonderful day to spend some time with us and to get you acquainted with who we are and what we do. Blackness is an audio series hosted by the Zexel Initiative, a newfound social initiative dedicated to breaking down stereotypes and generalizations made about marginalized communities. Blackness is a specific production focused on demonstrating the broad spectrum of the Black identity. Nowadays, in today's world of social media and just broad media landscape in general, the concept of Blackness is something that often gets misconstrued or something that tends to have a lot of conversation around it as we really dive into, what is Blackness and what does Blackness exactly mean? So, with that being said, on this show, we really try to focus on the concept that Blackness isn't just a monolith. It can't really be defined to one thing or, really described as just one specific experience. So we really demonstrate this through the guests we bring on our show. And speaking of guests, today we actually happen to be joined by Miss Susan Casper of Arizona Family. For those who may not be familiar, Miss Casper is an award-winning television journalist and media personality with decades experience in broadcast news. She's done work outside of Arizona. Currently, a lot of people might recognize her from her time at Arizona Family, but Miss Casper is an extremely talented journalist who's had years of experience in the field. And on today's episode, we really get to kind of dive into what her experience of navigating her career has looked like, especially being a Black woman in the industry, and what advice she can offer to young professionals who may be in the journalism landscape or just, any young leaders or activists who are trying to find their own way in the world. So nevertheless, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and are able to take something away from Miss Casper's experience. And I just want to give her a huge thanks for joining us on the show today. So that being said, I hope you guys enjoy. Good morning, Miss Casper. How are we doing?
I'm doing wonderful, Zion. Good morning to you.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, thank you for joining me on my show. It's a real honor to have you in the building.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you so much for extending the invitation.
Absolutely. Now, Ms. Casper, for those who may not be aware of your career, what you do, would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am currently the Community Relations Manager and Community Anchor at Arizona's Family, 3 TV, CBS 5, and Arizona's Family Sports. We have 3 amazing networks. I have done it all in this industry. I've had the privilege of doing a lot, which I know we'll cover throughout this podcast. But formerly, I worked in the market as well as a host of a lifestyle show here. And you'll see me also on a lifestyle show currently at Arizona's Family. So been in the market 18 years, a long time in this market, but in the industry over 30.
So now getting into your actual career, Ms. Casper, one of the first ways I knew you was actually through your journalism career and being involved with Arizona Family. So with that being said, my first question is, what made you want to jump into the world of journalism and storytelling?
I was in middle school, and our principal asked me and another classmate, it was Oak Hill Elementary School. And I said middle school, but it was elementary school. And he asked us to get a cassette player. I don't even know if you know what a cassette player is, and take a little microphone and do a story on the school. It was our 6th grade year, and I was so fascinated by this opportunity to tell the story of Oak Hill Elementary. So my classmate and I, we got together, and he said, well, I'm going to go interview the principal and the assistant principal and my favorite teacher. And I said, great, I'm going to interview the janitor, because I said the bus drivers and the cafeteria ladies. So we went off on our separate tracks, and I interviewed the most amazing people. I just remember their stories being so rich. And it was truly the heartbeat of our school. The cafeteria ladies who made our famous Frito bake. It was my favorite thing to eat, Frito bake. The bus drivers who got us to school safely every day. And the janitor, who we all loved, who walked around and made us laugh, but he was also the person responsible for getting the gum that we stuck at the bottom of the desk. And they were fascinating people. And during the assembly, my classmate played his interviews, and they were okay. I'm not saying anything was negative or bad, but the school laughed, literally crying, laughing, listening to my stories with the folks I interviewed. And at that moment, I realized everyone has an incredible story, and we have to stop looking for the obvious interview and go to the folks who are the heartbeat of who we are. And that's when I got bit by the journalism bug. And I said, I want to tell stories for the rest of my life.
That's amazing. Wow. That's actually a very unique way to go into the journalism field. I very much feel like one common theme I've heard from a lot of people in this field is that storytelling component and really getting to get into the actual story of what's there. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I hope that never dies. Because this industry is changing, as you know, Zion. It's changed so much even since I graduated from the University of West Florida in 1990. Now everything is consumed in little bite sizes, right? We hit them with stories that are about a minute and a half, as to where when I first started in this industry over 30 years ago, we were telling what's called long form stories. And that still happens, of course. 60 minutes is how I have people think about that. But that the idea of taking the time to find a rich story and to elevate someone to a level of interest beyond the bite sizes, I hope that never dies in our industry, because that is the heartbeat of what journalism is. Finding the stories that are deep within people's hearts and souls and really allowing them to share that, because everyone has a story. We just have to take the time to find it.
Absolutely. Now, looking further into your career, my second question to you is, what were some of your challenges that you faced entering the field? With those challenges in mind, do you feel any of those were specifically tied to your identity of being a Black woman?
So I started, as I said, over 30 years ago in this industry, and I never looked at color as a hindrance or as an advantage.
Mm.
I never, when I would apply for a job, thought I was applying as a Black girl. I was applying because I was the best storyteller.
Mm.
So my very first job interview in Panama City, Florida, was a job it was a reporter job, an MMJ, multimedia journalist. So meaning I would shoot my own stuff and edit it and put it all together. And I walked in excited because I was getting an opportunity to go for a reporter gig. And I walked into the studio. And as I was there, the news director took me on a tour.
Mm.
And he walked me into the studio where the maps were up on the screen. It was a green screen. It was the weather area. And I stood in front of the map and I opened my arm, and I know we're on a podcast, so I'll try to, I was pretending like I was showing you that the cold front was going to come across the country. And he looked at me and he goes, "Do you do weather?" And I said, "No, I just thought this was really cool." And I was a dancer. I grew up in ballet and jazz and all the things. So my hand had a natural movement. He goes, "I'm looking for a weekend weather anchor. Would you be interested?" And I said, "I've never done weather." And I said, and I'm going to be truthful with you. Geographically, I had a really hard time in geography. It was probably one of my worst and least favorite subjects. He goes, "I can teach you weather, but I can't teach you poise in front of the camera." He said, "And the way you gradually showed us how this cold front was going to move across," he said, "I think our viewers would love you." He goes, "I have a position if you want to audition for it right now." And I said, "Let's do it." So he threw a map up and I auditioned. I just made up the weather cast and I got the job. Mm-hmm. So my mother drove me to the job interview and I run outside after about 2.5, 3 hours. She goes, "I was going to send someone in to look for you. I didn't know what was taking so long." I go, "Mom, I just got the job as a weekend weather anchor." Mm-hmm. She goes, "I thought you were up for the reporter job." I said, "I was." But he wanted me to try out for the weather gig after I showed him that I could kind of, show my arm across the state, across the country map. And he hired me. And so my mother was blown away. So I say that to say, don't put yourself in a box. Mm. So I wasn't in there as a Black girl. I was in there as the best reporter candidate. Mm. I walked in as a reporter candidate, walked out as the weekend weather anchor. All because I wasn't afraid, because I didn't see myself as a Black girl, because I didn't put myself in a box, and I didn't allow him to see me as a Black reporter or as a rookie. I went in with the idea that I can do anything you ask me to do, and I'm going to do it well. I have a saying, and I raised my twin daughters to say this mantra: we walk in grace and we run in excellence. Mm. So to answer the first part of the question, I didn't have any stumbling blocks or anything that held me back because I didn't allow myself to be held back. And as I've aged in this industry, because I grew up in this industry, I wasn't even 21 when I started in TV. Now I'm in my early 50s. And probably the first time race was ever said to me was in this market in Phoenix, one of the top markets in the country. And someone said, and I don't necessarily think it was a racial thing. It was, well, maybe it was. She said, you don't fit the demographic. That is what someone said to me. And I remember thinking, what is the demographic? And why are you telling me what demographic I should fit in? And I used that as a way to grow. And it wasn't my lesson, it was hers that she had to realize we can't put people in boxes. We can relate and we can impact people's lives by just being great storytellers, by being great journalists, by being believable, by being authentic, by being yourself. And so I took that as a wake-up call that I had work to do. Because clearly, if someone didn't think I fit the demographic, then I wasn't doing my job well enough. And now we've grown and we've become very dear friends. And it was a lesson. And she later apologized to me for that because she said, I looked at you one-dimensionally and I apologize for that. And I learned that I had to look beyond what numbers or ratings or whatever showed and looked at the depth of the person. So I grew up, to me, in this industry, but also in this market in Phoenix, in the Phoenix metro, because I had never heard or had been told that I didn't fit into anything, because I define what I fit in and what box I go in, nobody else. So I've never allowed anyone's perception of me to control me. I want you to understand who I am, and my heart is always going to be pure, honest, authentic, and I'm always going to run at a high level of excellence.
Has there been any moments in your career where you feel like your presence specifically, mattered or made an impact? I'm sure that with you being, where you are in your field, you've inspired a lot of young African-American journalists.
Yeah, I feel it every day. I have the joy of mentoring a lot of young journalists, and some of which, are students here at Arizona State University. But I'm mentoring several right now. One who is working in Seattle as a news anchor, one who works at PBS, one who is in Tucson. And I meet with these young people monthly to make sure that I'm holding them accountable, but also see them. I think that the greatest gift you can give someone is your time in your industry so that you can help them through the pitfalls. So one of the girls is an African American, but and one of them is an African American male. But one of them is a Latina. And I remember her approaching me at an event I was mentoring and said she was inspired by me and asked if I would be her mentor. That is the greatest gift you can give anyone. And me being a Black woman, I don't think was a factor in them asking me to mentor them, but me just being a strong person, and they saw qualities in me that mattered and that they wanted to pattern themselves after. So I found that to be incredibly humbling to know that young journalists want to follow my footsteps. And I do think being a Black woman and being a trailblazer in this industry mattered to them, which is why they approached me. But I don't think it was the reason that they approached me. I think they just wanted to learn from someone who took the time to teach. And I believe if you mentor someone that you have to follow through. Now, I won't chase you. If you want me to mentor you, I'm going to give you assignments when we mentor. But then it's up to you to reach back out and say, hey, here's what we worked on. Take a look at my work and see if I've improved. And I will watch it and I will give you notes. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that give and take. But I won't chase you down. If you don't come back, that's okay too. Because I know life be lifing, as kids like to say. And you get busy and all of that. But I will give you my time. But it's up to you to make sure that you use that time wisely and that you grow from what we learn and what we talk about. But I do hear that, from young girls who approach me all the time. NABJ here at Arizona State University, you guys have a very strong chapter, and several of the young ladies have come up to me and thanked me, for being in this industry and for being, seen, and I appreciate that. And that means a lot to me.
Yeah, it means a lot to me too, man. Like truthfully, like as somebody who grew up in a predominantly non-black space, a lot of times I've experienced, I know myself, self-doubt of, hey, why is nobody who looks like me in this space? Is this really meant for me? And I know that through my time, actually like being able to grow, I've come to understand that, if there isn't a seat for you at the table, bring your own chair. But I can truthfully say that seeing someone like you succeed in this type of field is definitely inspiring.
I appreciate that. And I want to also, I'm glad you said, bring your own chair, because one of the very first things that I ever did where I really found my voice was in our morning editorial meeting here in Phoenix and in Panama City, which is where I started my career. And then I went to Tampa before moving to Phoenix. I've worked in those 3 markets. Not only having a seat at the table, but have something to say when you're at the table. Mm. So when you're in morning editorial meetings and everyone is bringing their story ideas to the table, have great story ideas, because you can't just come in and wait for someone to hand you a story. I would work my sources like crazy. And when I came in that meeting, I wanted to lead. The saying was, when I grew up, if it bleeds, it leads, right? If it's something with gruesome, it's probably going to lead the newscast. My stories were not crime stories at all. They were stories that matter. And every producer wanted my story in their newscast. And if I didn't lead a newscast, the 5, the 6, the 10, whatever, I was angry. I was mad at myself because I was like, clearly I didn't have good enough story ideas because no producer picked my story. I wouldn't allow anyone else's story ideas to be better than mine, which means you have to be prepared. You have to do your homework. You have to put in the time so that your story's mattered. One time, an MOS, man on the street, right? That's a term we use in our business. So when you hear MOSs, if someone says, hey, go out and get some MOSs, well, one time they did, and I watched them, and not one person was a person of color. And I brought that up in our morning editorial meeting. I said, hey, before we wrap, I would like to say, when you guys send photographers or whomever out to get an MOS or it's an opinion, like you ask a question and they get to answer, make sure that our MOSs, our man on the streets, reflect the community within which we live. Mm-hmm. If we come back and we have all white males or all white females, then that's not a reflection of our community. Mm-hmm. Talk to Black people, talk to Asians, talk to Hispanics, talk to every race, Native Americans, so that we are representative of who our consumers are, our viewers, so that they see themselves. So those are the lessons that you have to have in editorial meetings so that your voice matters.
With your unique perspective, I was going to ask, how has being a African-American woman shaped the way you approach storytelling in your career path?
So when I first got it was 2008 when we first got here to Phoenix, and I was new in the newsroom. At the time, it was a political year, and at the time, it was candidate Obama, Barack Obama, and they were sitting around going to do political stories, and I went into the editorial meeting, and I said, I would like to go to Mrs. White's, and I'd like to talk to the customers there about what it means to have, at the time, candidate Barack Obama seeking office. What does it mean to them to have an African-American man running for the biggest political move of his life, right? Who could possibly one day be our president? And everyone in the editorial meeting was like, okay, let's see what you can get. And I went out and I told this heartfelt story, which, by the way, led the newscast, because it was a perspective that they had never thought about. This was bigger than Barack Obama. This was an African-American man running for the highest political office in the land. And we might witness it in our lifetime. And that is impactful for people who are older Americans who, remember Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. walking, the marches and the civil rights movement. And to now be at this point where a man who's at the time he was just blowing up the world of politics unlike anything we'd ever seen before. And this could happen in our lifetime. What does that mean to you? There were people in Mrs. White's crying while they were interviewing with me. And I went to not just Black people. I talked to the white customers. I talked to all of the customers that were in there, every race I talked to. What does this mean to you that we could possibly be on the brink of our first Black president? And every answer was so heartfelt and so moving. And my newsroom was moved by it. They said, Susan, thank you for bringing that idea to us. But if you weren't a Black woman, that story may have never crossed your mind to even tell it. But don't be afraid to pitch stories that matter to you as a Black man, Zion. I encourage you as you grow up in this industry, and I know you're going to be amazing in this field. I encourage you to not forget who you are as a Black man when you are pitching stories, when you are telling stories, all of that, because that will matter to the viewer. And I encourage you to do that. And not every story is going to lend itself to that, but don't be afraid to say, I want to tell this story from the Black perspective. And if you do it well, it's going to resonate with every race.
What's something you wish you would have known earlier on in your career as a young Black professional that would have helped you, that you feel would have helped you navigate your journey a little bit?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question, because I just, believe it or not, at 53 years old and 30 years in this industry, I'm just figuring it out. So I say that to say you're not going to figure it out right away. Here's what I wish I had learned when I first started. Actually, it's two things. One, no is a complete sentence. Robin Roberts from Good Morning America said that. No is a complete sentence. I wish I had learned to say no a lot sooner in my life, because we think we have to say yes to everything, and you don't. You'll burn out quicker that way. And number two, stand up for yourself. I don't like confrontation. It's just not my personality. And that can be a problem in a newsroom where strong personalities prevail. I'm a very strong person, but I am not a confrontational person. And this industry, you're going to hit some confrontational people. There's going to be some bullies in the newsroom. I'm just going to tell you. And the competition's not at the station across the street. The competition's right in the newsroom with you. It's across your desk. It's across the newsroom. Everyone is gunning for the lead story. So toughen yourself up. I wish I had learned that sooner. Now I don't worry about that, because I'm at a level where I can say no and I do it well. And I also am not afraid to stand up for myself. I'm not afraid to speak my mind if I have to. I don't like to do it all the time, but you will know if I'm going to be willing to let you walk all over me. Because when growing up in this industry, I let people walk all over me. And I wish I hadn't done that, because you have a tendency to just be quiet and things fester and you overanalyze and you self-doubt, and then the imposter syndrome comes in and all the other things. So those are my two lessons. Be tough. Be tough in that newsroom. Speak up for yourself, and defend yourself well, and say no.
Absolutely. No, that's actually something I've had to work on myself. I'm a very, not necessarily a passive person, but I'm very much like, I don't like
confrontation.
Exactly, yes. And then taking some studio classes where it's like having to interact with different people who have very strong personalities, it's like, okay, let me stand my ground.
And just remember, I will say, I've said this and I have said this a lot. Silence is a language. Don't be afraid to be quiet, because some people are going to try to out-talk you. They're going to try to cut you off and all of that. Sitting quiet is a language, and it's okay to not try to battle somebody by out-talking them or, all of that. Just be quiet.
Absolutely. That actually ties into our next question, which is for young professionals or creatives entering, whether that be the journalism field or whatever professional field they're seeking, who are still trying to find their voice. What advice or words of wisdom can you give them?
Be true to who you are. I have honestly, and I say this kind of laughing, I have never done a resume tape. My reputation spoke for itself. My very first resume tape to get my very first job at WMBB in Panama City, where I told you I was a weekend weather anchor, was the only resume tape I ever had to do. Because as soon as my contract would end at a station, another station was calling, picking me up. And I don't say that to be boastful. I say that because my work speaks for itself. So when you are good at what you do, you have strong integrity, you are always prepared, you are kind-hearted, a good storyteller, and to my other phrase, you walk in grace and you run in excellence. You don't have to be out there. That's not to say you're not going to have to work hard. It's not to say you're not going to have to put a reel together eventually, because you probably will, and keep your resume tight. But if people know who you are, your reputation speaks for itself. They're going to want to call Zion when his contract ends to get him at their station. So yeah, just be very honest with yourself. Don't cut corners. Don't, sell your soul to the devil. I've seen it. I've seen journalists who are no longer in this business because they were doing shady stuff. You don't have to do that. Just be sure you are good at what you do. Make sure you have a very high ethical standard, not only for your newsroom, but for yourself. Because we're ambassadors for our stations. You're an ambassador for Arizona State University. You're an ambassador for Cronkite. The minute you walk out of here, everything you do, especially on social media, is looked at. So conduct yourselves accordingly. What would your mama think if you were doing that, right? And we have to remember that we are ambassadors for our television stations, for our newspapers, for our radio stations, for our podcasts, and everything we do could blow back on us. As long as you're doing stuff in the light, you always are going to be above board. So don't get in the mud. Don't get in the mud with people. If someone says, hey, yeah, it's okay to write your script through AI. And I'm not saying AI isn't a tool, and I'm not bashing AI. Please don't email me saying, oh, Susan said that. No, AI is definitely a tool. But don't let that tool become a hindrance. Still use your own voice and still do it the right way. Don't cut corners, especially in journalism, because there's already so many people who are pessimists about what we do. And, we want to preserve the integrity of journalism. We can't lose this. We can't lose what we have. The freedom of speech is important, and we're the only profession covered in the Constitution, so let's protect it.
Absolutely. Only profession covered in the Constitution. That's
freedom of speech.
That's a line I'm going to have to take. Okay. So this is a question that we ask all of the guests on our show. It's a little bit of a broad question, but specifically, what does Blackness mean or look like to you?
Blackness to me, and I use this word again, excellence. We have a responsibility to our ancestors to not only show up, but to show out. They paid the ultimate price. Back in slavery, they were killed, they were lynched, they were dragged, they were beaten. They were all of these things for our freedom, for the right to vote, for the right to sit anywhere they wanted to on the bus, for the right for us to have a voice, to matter, to be seen. And we still have a long way to go, Zion. I'm not saying that we have a broad stroke of, perfection now, but it's up to us to continue to run with that torch, to continue to show up prepared, to continue to show up educated, to be God-fearing, to put Christ first in your life. Be aware of the sacrifice that our ancestors paid for us to be here right now, for you to have your own podcast called Blackness. There was a price to pay for that. And we have to remember that. I hold that in my heart every single day. I think about the work that my mother and father did so that I could be in pageants growing up and run track and never feel like I didn't have what my classmates had, my friends who didn't look like me. They made sure that I felt seen, loved, and prepared. So we have to come into everything that we do, knowing more, doing more, and being more, because that is a requirement. My daughters always used to say to their teachers, and one of their teachers approached me, and she said, yeah, I was talking to Sophia and Sierra, and I said, great job on your test. You got an A. And they said, yeah, it's a requirement. And they said, and I tell them, my husband and I are very clear. When you're in school, it is not a choice. It is a requirement to be an honor student. It is a requirement because guess what? We have given you the seeds and the foundation to be great, to be excellent. You don't have to do all the other things that some people have to do to get up in the morning and go to work and do this and do that. But you have to make the grades because we have given you the foundation to be excellent. So that is a responsibility. It's a requirement. It's a requirement for us to be doing exactly what we're doing at a very high level.